Risk aversion is one of the more important concepts we're going to cover this semester. So I wanted to put together a little example in PowerPoint, kind of turn it into a little video walkthrough and illustrate exactly what we mean by risk aversion and how to apply it. First, let's start with the definition. Concept of risk aversion states that investors do not like risk. So if two investments offer the same expected return, all investors are going to prefer the investment with the lowest risk. Again, they're risk averse, so if there's no extra bonus for taking on higher levels of risk, they're going to take the investment choice that has the lowest risk level. However, we have to be careful. A lot of people confuse the concept of risk aversion with risk minimization. They're not the same. Instead, investors seek to avoid risk unless they're adequately compensated for taking on any additional risk. So when we're talking about risk aversion, what we're saying is that all else equal, investors will avoid risk and choose the lowest risk alternative. However, if all else is not equal and the two investments have different returns, investors may choose a higher risk, higher return option. Now notice in here that in the word adequately, I've got it all caps, bold, underlined, and you might wonder why. Well, adequately is definitely a vague term. It's actually an intentionally vague term. What I'm trying to do here is illustrate the idea that different people have different levels of risk aversion. Your level of risk aversion is going to depend on your personal characteristics. Age is a big factor that determines risk aversion. Typically, younger people are less risk averse. They're less sensitive to risk because they have more time to recover from losses if they do experience them. On the other hand, people that are older or in retirement typically are more risk averse. They're more sensitive to risk because they don't have as much time to recover. However, age is only one factor. Your personality, different people just by nature are less risk averse or more risk averse. Your past experiences. Maybe if you've had a lot of large investment losses in the past, you become more risk averse because you've felt that damage from risk before. Your wealth has an impact. Your number of dependents has an impact. Lots of different things are going to affect that level of risk aversion. So the additional compensation that I need to compensate me for risk is probably going to be different than the additional compensation that you need to compensate you for taking additional levels of risk. Let's try to walk through some examples to really illustrate risk aversion. Let's start with two investment choices, and here we have investment A and investment B. And investment A is a lower return, lower risk investment choice. Our risk levels are just a simple 1 through 5 scale. 1 is the lowest level of risk, 5 is the highest level of risk. So investment A has about a 5% expected return. That's the average rate of return you can expect to earn from that investment. And it's got relatively low risk at a 2. Investment B has a higher expected return. On average, you'll earn 3% more from taking investment B, but it's also got a lot more risk. Maybe sometimes you'll earn 25-30%, maybe other times you'll lose 25 or 30%. So investment B does pay more on average, but you take a lot more risk in order to get there. So which investment is the better choice? In this case, either one. Both of these investments are valid choices. Investment A is going to be preferred by those that are more risk averse. They're more sensitive to taking that risk, and they need higher additional compensation. So that additional 3% is not enough to compensate them for the higher level of risk associated with investment B. They're going to take the safe alternative, make a little bit less return on average, but not have as much volatility in their returns. On the other hand, people that are less risk averse, they don't need as much extra compensation for taking on risk. They're less sensitive to those risk factors, are going to choose investment B. For them, that extra 3% higher return is enough to compensate them for the additional level of risk. So with risk aversion, if we have two investments, some people are going to take the lower risk, lower return option. Other people are going to take the higher risk, higher return option. Now let's make a minor change to this. What we're going to do is just flip around the expected return on B a little bit, make it smaller. Now in this case, investment B still pays a little bit higher, but instead of 3% more return, on average you're only going to make 1%. You've still got just as much additional risk, but now your additional compensation has been dropped from 3% to 1%. Should now everybody jump over to investment A, or are some people still going to take investment B? The answer is more people are going to move over to investment A, but there still are going to be some people, those that are the least risk averse, the least sensitive to risk, are going to say, you know what, B is riskier, but it still pays me more. So that 1% extra return is enough to compensate me for the risk. Now most people again are going to shift over to investment A. You're taking a lot of extra risk for not much extra return with B, so most people are not going to find that attractive. But there are going to be some people with low levels of risk aversion that take investment B. When we're dealing with risk aversion, anytime the investment has a higher expected return, there are going to be some people willing to take on more risk for that higher expected return. It doesn't have to be a lot, but as long as the expected return is a little bit higher, some people will take it. As that expected return increases, more and more people are going to shift over to the higher risk alternative. Now we're going to walk through an example with 3 investment choices. What we've done now is add investment C, which again has a little bit higher expected return and is the riskiest investment. Now here, all 3 investments are valid choices. Investment A is the safest, but also has the lowest expected return. Investment C is the riskiest, but also has the highest expected return. Investment B is in the middle. So some people are going to choose investment A, some people are going to choose investment B, some people are going to choose investment C. Again, more risk-averse people are going to choose A, the least risk-averse investment people are going to choose C, and the people with a middle-of-the-road level of risk aversion are going to choose investment B. Our last example is going to just modify investment C slightly so that instead of a 10% expected return, investment C now only has an 8% expected return. When we do this, now investment C is no longer a valid choice. The reason for that is the investors that are most risk averse are going to choose investment A. They're going to take the safest, lowest returning investment choice. However, people that are less risk averse have no incentive to go ahead and take C. It doesn't offer any extra additional compensation for the higher level of risk relative to B. So here, investment A is a valid choice for those that are more risk averse. Investment B is a valid choice for those that are less risk averse. But investment C offers no additional compensation relative to B, but it's riskier than B. Therefore, risk-averse investors will always choose B as opposed to C. So again, investment A, investment B, valid choices. Investment C is no longer a valid choice for risk-averse investors. Hopefully these examples have helped illustrate the concept of risk aversion, and now you have a little bit better understanding, because this is going to be an important topic we're going to come back to again and again and again before the semester is done. Thank you.